how I lost 15 pounds and kept them off without dieting. So this isn't anything recent or anything, it's just something that I haven't ever really talked about because again, I never want like the main goal of this channel to be intentional weight loss, but then I also realized that the weight loss that I experienced wasn't really intentional at all. It was just linked to a bunch of different like diet and lifestyle changes that I kind of implemented, and I thought that this could be helpful for you. So here we are. So first of all, little disclaimer slash background. I was never overweight, I do realize that, and if you are the weight that I was previously or like even heavier than that, please don't think that that means that you need to lose weight by any means. I'm actually not even going to share weight numbers. I don't feel that's relevant. I just want to share that I did lose 15 pounds, and I do understand that that's not a huge amount of weight. But I feel like since the weight loss that I experienced wasn't intentional, it was more about focusing on health and about doing like a bunch of little things that then like slowly led to this weight loss. I feel like it brought me to my kind of like set point weight, and I feel like if you apply all of these principles to your life, it's going to bring you to your set point weight, and for you that set point weight might not be just like 15 pounds lighter, it might be like 20 or 30 or 40 or 100 pounds lighter even. I also want to point out that I did get older, and as we age, some people may like gain weight, lose weight. There can be like changes in that department, so that could have played a role. And also my family, like my entire family, is thin, so genetically that is definitely something that is an advantage for me. So again, I don't want to take like all this credit. I don't want to act like I lost like a ton of weight and then I'm giving you the secrets. This is not about this at all. This is just to give you some little tips that I implemented, and I feel that if you implement all these tips, then it can also help get you to your set point weight. So those are like the disclaimers. Now let's get into a little backstory. Just a little reminder that you can find all of the services I offer on my website, and that's going to be the first link in the description. You can check out things that are paid, like my nutrition coaching sessions or my courses, but there's also a ton of free material, from webinars to ebooks to checklists to challenges, so make sure to check that out. I was never like overweight at all growing up. I would say I was like thin. I wasn't like super skinny with like super long, very skinny limbs or anything like that. I was just like thin, at least by like European standards. I was just like standard thin. But then as I got into my like late teens and then early adulthood, I started gaining a little bit of weight. Again, like nothing major, just started gaining a little bit of weight, and I guess like everything was normal. I was starting like having hormone fluctuations, and also I started like living on my own as a young adult, and so I didn't have like my mom to cook like these healthy balanced meals for me, and I would just be tempted to just eat like whatever and not really have like a healthy balanced way of eating. Then I started getting a little bit into diet culture, as I feel like a lot of like young teen girls were at that time, and I was like obsessing over my like thighs. That was like my thing, and so I started trying to like lose weight, but this is in a very loose way, because I remember like I literally had a diary where I was like, okay, today I want to lose weight, so here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna eat this and do that, and then like I had like, I don't know, brownies and cookies that day, and so the next day I wrote, yesterday I had brownies and cookies, that's not good, let's not do that anymore. So I wasn't really like actively like doing what I was like reading about to lose weight, but I remember that it was like a thought in my head and something that I was like, okay, maybe I should try to eat a little bit less or do this or that. Just like tons of diet culture thoughts, which of course started making things worse. And so as time went on, I wasn't losing weight at all. I was gaining a little bit of weight, you know, month by month. And so I started being like, okay, I need to do stuff to like get back to the weight I like was previously. It's like a very weird thing when you've always been like, your identity has always been to be like thin, even if you're not like fat at all. Like again, I wasn't fat by any means, but I wasn't like as thin as I used to be. So I was like, this is weird, this is not me anymore, what can I do? And so I started being like, okay, let me cut carbs, let me just like have protein and veggies. And this was completely ridiculous, because I would do like one meal where I had like meat and veggies, because I wasn't vegetarian back then. I had like meat and veggies, and then 2 hours later I was starving, and so I would eat like an entire brownie by myself, and then I was like, oh no, I'm gonna skip dinner. So I skipped dinner, but then at 10 p.m. I was like, oh, let me just have this entire box of cookies, and oh, I just had all these cookies, let me like go buy a pizza. So it was just completely ridiculous. I was deep into all or nothing mentality, binge eating, all of that. It was just like a very not healthy relationship with food that I was having at that time. And I think it's also important to note that I'm saying all this kind of like in hindsight, but when I was in it, I didn't realize this at all. Like, probably people around me didn't even realize that I was doing this. It's not like I was binging every day. It was just something that was kind of happening sometimes, and I never like threw up or like heavily exercised or anything, did anything to like compensate. I just like had moments where I ate a lot of food, and I complained a little bit sometimes. I was like, oh, I wish I was skinnier, but it was nothing like overpowering. And so I feel like it's very interesting because there's probably like lots of people who start getting into diet culture like that. Like, they don't really realize it. It's just like small things, but then these small things add up, and then you like just start spiraling out of control once you start kind of like the yo-yo, like restricting and then like binging cycle. And then kind of at some point things kind of started switching, and I stopped doing all the bad things that I was doing and started focusing on the right things. And the thing is, I never had like an aha moment where I was like, okay, I'm gonna start losing weight now and I'm gonna start doing the right things now. It was all kind of like little things that all were like added together, and that's what led me to like where I am now and where I was like 6 years ago. And so now I'm gonna share with you all these right things that I did and that started adding up. So now let's talk about what I did to lose this weight. So the first thing that I did was I stopped prioritizing weight and started prioritizing health, because I actually had a little tiny like health issue, very minor, but basically I get like blood work done regularly, and on like the latest test I did, I had like very high blood sugar levels and very high triglycerides, which is like basically like fat levels, and that had like never happened to me before, and it was nothing extreme, but for me it was pretty surprising, and even my doctor was pretty surprised. That was like a first kind of shock for me, because I realized that I was not eating in a healthy way. I realized that I was like eating like way too much like processed foods and junk food and like lots of treats and like soda every day. I realized that that was not good, and it was affecting my weight a little bit, but not to a point where it really like bothered me, because I wasn't like overweight or anything. So the fact that it started like kind of affecting my health, that was actually pretty bothersome to me. So I remember seeing this and being like, okay, now I have to take my diet a little bit more seriously. And I remember that my doctor said, you know, try to lower like sugary fruits, you know, like grapes and things like that. And I was like, well, first I'm gonna start off by not having like a tower of bread and Nutella for every snack and like paninis for every meal and like soda all the time. I'm gonna do that and keep eating my grapes, and we'll see. So I'm not saying that you need like a health issue to come up to start focusing on eating healthier, but I do think that it's important to shift the perspective from weight and to find like better reasons that are more worthy than your weight to get like healthier eating patterns, and to understand that it is also affecting your health, and if you want to be in the best health possible, then it's good for you to follow healthy lifestyle habits and eating habits in general. Another thing I started doing, which was super helpful, was that I started increasing whole foods and decreasing processed foods. Because around this time, I was eating like a panini menu every single lunch. So that was like a tomato and mozzarella panini, and I was having with that like a dessert, like a brownie, and then I had like some chips as like a starter. And in the menu there's also like a can of soda. You could also do water, but I was like, I'm not gonna pay for water when I can like have soda. So I was having that like 5 times a week, and then I was also on top of that having multiple desserts and like multiple snacks, like multiple things that were like really highly processed. During the weekend I would go back to my parents' house, so I would eat healthy there, so that was like pretty good, but the week was just like catastrophic. So I started increasing whole foods, adding like more fruit, more veggies, more like whole grains, all of that, and also again like limiting takeout, which is another aspect, but it goes within this thing of like increasing whole foods and like decreasing processed foods, and like most of the takeout I was getting was processed. So I started by having like the lunch, like the panini menu, only like every other day instead of every day, and then only like once a week, and then at some point I like stopped doing it entirely and just had it like once in a while. If I would give like one piece of advice to somebody who's trying to lose weight or like get healthy or like do anything like that, increase your whole foods. Just increase the whole foods. You can eat carbs, you can eat tons of carbs, but try to get them mainly from grains and legumes and fruit and veggies instead of from like cake and donuts and brownies and soda. That's what I was doing. The more you increase your whole foods, the less room you're naturally gonna have for the refined foods. But you need to do it in that way, because if you just focus on getting rid of all the processed foods, it's gonna trigger this like restriction, and you're gonna crave it even more, so it's not really gonna work. Another thing I started doing was turning away from diet culture. I was really into looking at like skinny girl blogs, things like that, and it was more of like a just mindless consuming of it. I never actually was intentional in like doing the things that they said on there, but I just realized that that was what I was kind of like, that was the content I was consuming, that's what I was like fueling my brain with. I was also reading about how lowering carbs could be helpful to lose weight and like all this nonsense. So I kind of like tuned out of that and tuned into getting a healthier relationship with food. So I started working on that more and getting kind of like information on that, and stopped focusing on like all the diet culture BS. I also really focused on adding in more healthy foods. I knew that just like taking away foods didn't work. I tried that in the past. It didn't work. So what I tried doing was increasing my whole carbs intake, because like a lot of people at the time, I was reading on carbs and how they're so unhealthy and they make you gain like all this weight. And so I was deciding to like save my carbs and my calories by skipping like pasta and potatoes and rice and like bread and all of these carbs, and even like some fruit, like very sugary fruit. I was skipping all that and just like having protein and veggies, and then having like a bunch of like donuts and cake and all of that, and like candy and soda, because I was like, well, it's compensating. I'm like balancing it out. I'm just getting my carbs. I'm just not getting them from like potatoes. I'm getting them from cake, and all is fine. But of course, all was not fine. That is absolutely not healthy. I don't know how I believe that, and it makes me sad when I see other people believing that today. It just does not work like that. You need to eat enough whole carbs in order to be able... I left my window open and heard like a huge sound. I thought that somebody had like broken into my apartment. But again, this is what I talked about earlier. Instead of focusing on reducing all the sweets and treats that you're having, focus on increasing healthier alternatives to that. So for me, I was eating tons of refined carbs. So to compensate, I started increasing my whole carbs, and naturally, I wasn't craving my refined carbs anymore. Another thing I really started doing was addressing the underlying issues, because food was not like the issue here for me. It was that something else was going on and I was using food to cope. And so I really started working on that. And for me, like one of the main underlying issues was that I needed breaks. I needed to be able to do something that wasn't like working. Like by working, I mean like studying, because that's all I was doing literally. And I felt like the only time where I was allowed to have a break was to like eat or go to the bathroom. And since going to the bathroom isn't fun, then I just ate. And I felt like I had an excuse. If I was eating, then I was like allowed to take a break. And so that was the real issue with me. And I also wanted to make my eating periods as long as possible, because as long as I was eating, it meant that I didn't have to go back to studying. So now I started working on how to kind of get out of that. And I tried to set up like actual real breaks for myself where food was not necessarily involved. For instance, I would get home from like my classes, and instead of like grabbing like a huge snack and making it last as long as possible, because I knew that once it was over I had to study, I would give myself 40 minutes to watch like my favorite TV show. And I was like, okay, you have these 40 minutes. During these 40 minutes you can eat a small snack if you're hungry. But mostly I wasn't hungry. It was just like an excuse as usual. And so that's when I started implementing these breaks, and I started reading or like calling a friend that I hadn't called in a long time, or like going for a walk outside, or like playing the piano, doing all these things. And so little by little, this gave my brain the signal that I was allowed to have these breaks. I was allowed to do that, and food was not the only thing I was allowed to do when I wasn't studying. Now, not everybody will have the exact same underlying issue as me, which is like needing breaks, but I do really encourage you to figure out what your like kind of underlying issue is, or if like there's multiple. For me, there's also kind of like general unhappiness, but I'm going to talk about that later. But you have to figure out what it is, and then you need to focus on addressing that before you try to tackle the food aspect. Because if you just like focus solely on the food aspect, you're still going to have this like big thing to work with, and you really need to get to the bottom of that first. I also really started listening to my hunger and fullness cues, which is something that in the past I did naturally, but with all this kind of like diet culture talk that I was getting into, I started disregarding them completely. Either I would kind of starve myself in between meals to like save calories so I could like eat more like other meals, or I would eat like way past my fullness. I was like basically completely disregarding hunger, fullness. So I really started listening to my body more and realizing that if I started the day by eating when I was hungry, then I was less likely to overeat when I was full. If you're trying to get your hunger cues back and you only focus on fullness and you only focus on not overeating, but you're always like letting yourself starve, that's not gonna work. You're never gonna be able to find that balance. You really need to focus on both in order for you to really get your hunger cues back. I mean, the amount of desserts that I ate was like completely ridiculous. Like even my like family would laugh about it. I was literally like a never-ending pit. I could just put so many desserts. It's crazy to think that I was even able to do that physically. It really goes to show that if you have an unhealthy relationship with food, and if you're not eating like correctly and healthy balanced meals, that your cues are so off that you can literally like starve and be like fine with it, or you can literally overstuff yourself to the point of like being sick and not even feel it. I mean, when I look at myself today, sure, sometimes I eat a little past fullness, but once I'm really done, like I'm done. There's no way you're getting anything, like even my favorite dessert ever, you're not getting me to eat that. For me, another reason why I was constantly eating past fullness was that I wasn't like very satisfied with my life and other aspects, and so I would just like eat to like fill myself, but that wasn't really what I needed. Food wasn't really what I needed. So I'm gonna talk about that a little bit more right in the next point. Increasing my overall happiness. It's very easy to turn to food when you're generally unhappy. We tend to see food as a coping mechanism, as a way to deal with boredom or loneliness or stress or sadness or whatever. But I think that it's so worth it to shift your main focus from like finding comfort in food to actually getting like happier in general. And I know that's like easier said than done, obviously, but if you can find like things that you can tweak about your life to make it happier, to make it like more worthwhile for you, then that's really where like all of your energy should be focused on. For me, I got out of studies that I like hated and that I was like miserable in, and got to ones that I enjoyed more. And at the time, I also got into like a happy relationship, which also helped. And I started doing things because I liked them, and I just allowed myself to do things even if it was just for like my personal benefit and it was not going to increase like any skills or like productivity or whatever. I just allowed myself to do these things, like I talked about like with the breaks earlier as well. And that way my sole purpose of the day wasn't just food anymore, because food used to be the most exciting part of my day, and now I had all these other things to focus on, and so food was just like one thing among others. And finally, a very important thing that I did was I kept my pleasure of eating. I kept on enjoying treats every day, nearly every day. It's just that I wasn't having like huge, enormous amounts of them all the time. I was just having a little bit and really enjoying that, and I was never like preventing myself from having something when I craved it. It's just that since I was doing like all these other things, my cravings just started decreasing and decreasing and decreasing until I was just like mainly craving like whole healthy foods and sometimes treats, and both of them were totally fine. I totally allowed myself to indulge in like everything and just have this way of eating again that I've been like maintaining for the past 6 years at least, and with no effort, literally. And that's really because I truly enjoy my way of eating and I truly listen to my body, and that enables me to make the best possible choices without it being an effort. So I think I said it all. I think I didn't hold anything back. There are just like a few points I want to conclude on. So this period was around like 10 years ago when I started having like kind of this unhealthy relationship with food and gaining some weight, and then around like from 6 years ago where I started like being at like this current weight that I am now, and I have since maintained that weight with like literally zero effort, because for me I don't see any of this as an effort. It's like completely my lifestyle now, and that's totally the way it can become for you if you do all of this in a way that fits within your lifestyle, in a way that is like slow, that you build habits sustainably instead of like crash dieting. Again, I'm not saying that I needed to lose weight. I'm not saying that weight loss was my main motivator, and I do realize that 15 pounds is not a lot, but the goal of the video is not really to focus on like my weight loss. It's just to say that if you eat in a way like all the things that I listed above, then that's gonna bring you to your set point. And my set point was 15 pounds lighter than the weight I was at when I started. Maybe yours is gonna be like 100 pounds lighter. Maybe yours is gonna be like 15 pounds heavier. I don't know. But I really do encourage you to follow these principles, and not necessarily for weight, but for health reasons, and then healthier relationship with food in general, and just like happier way of living, again, in general. That's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like it, subscribe, and see you on my next one. Bye.